We've had the YouTube channel for just over 3 years. I got the email on the 3-year anniversary of it about 2 weeks ago. And I got another email this morning, about 7 hours ago, that said I just uploaded the 800th video. And then the email came in last week that the cumulative total over 3 years has been 95,000 people, 95,000 views on all of the material. So that'll surpass 100,000 probably just within the next 3 weeks or so. And that matters much less than we think. Because if we're going to really truly convert people, how do you do it? You do it face to face. Yeah, you do it face to face. What we do online just gives people an ability to see what we are and what we present and how we do it, how we look at the Scriptures. That's all it was ever intended to do. If we convert people, it's going to be face to face. Why I like John chapter 4 is that it shows Jesus with an individual. When we go over the Gospels on Sunday, we'll reach John. So we've already given our introductory material on Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are really good about showing Jesus preaching out to the multitudes. Think the Sermon on the Mount. John is to some extent the opposite of that, and John records a lot of very personal interactions. And John 4 is one of those with the woman at the well. And it just so happens it becomes this really great template for what he did as to what we can do to get people interested in the gospel. So let's start with John chapter 4. Just in verse 1, we'll lay out the kind of the introduction to this, the first 3 verses. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So it seems like looking to avoid a little bit of conflict, he wants to go down south, goes through Samaria. So he came to where? A city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. This was also Abraham's kind of running around ground. When Abraham comes in from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran, he comes into the land right around the city of Sychar, right around Samaria. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water, and what did Jesus say to her? Give me a drink. So the first thing that Jesus does out of these 4 that we'll talk about tonight was that he was able to catch her interest. Now, why was this so noteworthy? Give me a drink. Because his disciples had gone away that day to buy food. There's 2 reasons why this was kind of noteworthy. First of all, she was a woman. First of all, she was a woman. And what was the problem with that? That interaction just was kind of frowned upon, but there was another thing that was really frowned upon, and what was that? The fact that she was a Samaritan. So what was the background of the Samaritans? Why was that such a notable problem? They were a mixed race. So the Israelites that were taken away into Assyrian captivity, some of them were left in the land. And when the Assyrians removed the Israelites, they brought in some people of several different countries, and they began to intermarry. And that was just an abomination to the Jews. In fact, John even makes a note of it. What does he say at the end of verse 9? That the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Now, it wasn't for lack of trying, because in our Sunday morning class, we went through Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther. So does some of you remember what took place with the Samaritans and the Jews? There was opposition, definitely. And part of that opposition was because the Samaritans actually wanted to help build the temple. But of course, what did the Jews say? No, we don't want your help. And that long, centuries-long animosity was just still constantly there. You also have the issue of where this woman worshiped. So where did she worship? Mount Gerizim. So Manasseh, a Jew named Manasseh, long ago, married Sanballat's daughter. Sanballat was one of the people that we knew in Nehemiah. He kind of headed the opposition to the Jews. So he marries Sanballat's daughter, and he built a temple on Mount Gerizim. Now, likely it was not the same one that had been built 400 or 500 years prior. It would probably have been destroyed and rebuilt. But that's where that temple came from. So a Jew who had married a Samaritan had then built this temple. Well, you can imagine how the Jews thought about the temple on Mount Gerizim. Not a lot. But he catches her interest because of why? Because he spoke to her. You know, to him, she wasn't what? She wasn't a Samaritan. She wasn't a woman. She was what? She was just another soul. And specifically a soul who needed what? Who needed saving. Yeah, who needed saving. Now, what good lesson do you think we can take from this? That what? I heard some good answers. I just didn't catch all of it. That what? Right, and that we ought to have what kind of attitude? No matter who it is, no matter what they look like, we're going to what? We're going to talk to them. We're going to try, because everyone needs that gospel. Lance, you said something I couldn't quite. Okay, everyone has value. Even a Samaritan, which essentially the Jews looked to as dogs. Looked to as dogs. So, first of all, what he does is just simply catch her. He just simply caught her attention. He was willing to talk to her. We're willing to talk, hopefully, to people. And as we're willing to talk with people, as we move on in verse 10, we're going to see, secondly, what took place. So in verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where did you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as well as the sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman then said to him, "Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." Creates an interest with essentially what? It's going to ultimately be with the spiritual water, but he catches her interest because he's willing to talk about, kind of at first, the idea of the physical water, kind of catching her with the physical water, then of course gets it right into the living water. She was confused because he talks about living water, which to the Jews was what? The water that moved. This was in a well, and not only was it in a well, it was deep. Authorities say that it was about 100-foot deep well, which, I mean, even today is not a small. If you have to go out and dig a 100-foot well on your property, that's not a shallow well. So that water would have been stagnant, potable, usable, but nevertheless stagnant. You can imagine what the living water would have been like, and how she would have wanted living water. But what does he want to talk to her about? The spiritual water. So in spiritual terms, what is the living water? Because Jesus never elaborates on it, but it's the gospel. Now, if you go one step further, what would you describe the gospel as? If we're thinking about this image here of living water, what would you describe the gospel as? Okay, you could describe it as something that gives you living hope. You could describe it as something that was refreshing, like the graciousness of God and the mercy of God. You could describe it by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ that's able to wash away our sins. If you, hopefully this isn't pushing the metaphor too far, but if you talk about it as living water, you would compare it to dead water or stagnant water. What would be the dead or the stagnant water in this circumstance? What religion would it be? Not only the Jews' religion, but the Samaritan religion as well. It was dead. It was impure. The living water is what Jesus was willing and what He was able to give to her. One of the most wonderful things is that Jesus here teaches us how to turn a secular conversation into a spiritual one. Like I said, all of the things that we try to do to attract people, people call it the attractional church model, and everyone does it. They try to get people to come. But one of the finest ways to do that consistently is to actually reach out to people individually. So what do a lot of churches try today? A lot of them try entertainment. Do you know what kind of the big thing is right at the moment? I listened to a podcast this morning about this. Do you know what it is? It's sports ministries. So if your church sits on a property and you're not using all of the property, contact Upward and they'll help you set up a baseball league, a softball league, a t-ball league, a pickleball league. They'll help you set up basketball. They'll help you set up all of these different sports that are meant to be city sports. Anyone can come. And in the podcast, they were talking about churches that would have 100 kids, 150 kids, 200 kids that show up on the weekend with the hopes that what will mom and dad do? Oh, we were there yesterday playing in a tournament on Sunday. Pop on back in, see what's up. That's the attractional church model. Right now, this just happens to be kind of hot, probably because of pickleball. To be honest with you, everybody's playing pickleball. I don't know. I don't get it, but everybody's playing it. So, what do we do? How can we look around and try to get the conversations from something that's secular to something that's spiritual? So let's run down some of the ideas and we can kind of all talk about this just a little bit. First of all, prospects can come from everywhere. From everywhere. So where all can they come from? To you. Okay, so at a doctor's office. Where else? Yeah. Grocery store? Yeah, ball game. Turn it back on them. A ball game. Oh, yeah. I mean, if your kids play sports, you're going to meet all kinds of parents. Where else? Nursing home, yes. I won't talk about the nursing home specifically, but we will deal with some of that a little bit later on. What about where you work? If it's acceptable, some places are, easier than others. I know that. At school, obviously with neighbors. Let me leave you with this one more that you don't forget. Who else is a prospect? All of you guys gave great answers. There's even more answers. But who else, on the cusp of us having a singing meeting, which Brother Stevens will do 2 sermons on, from what I understand, on Sunday morning. So just like a regular Sunday worship assembly, if we invite people there, then as we'll learn about singing through the week, then hopefully we'll have a very nice congregational singing on Friday evening. Who is a group of people that you don't need to forget about? Who is a group of people that you don't need to forget about? Don't forget about the people who've fallen away, because sometimes they're low down on our list. Let's face it. I understand they fell away for a reason, but it might be that after time passes, they might be willing to entertain coming back. And I only say that because that's kind of a group of people that it's easy to forget about, because we think the mind was made up sometimes decades ago. But don't forget about them too. Okay? Secondly, let's talk about the idea of piquing interest, but most of all, living a righteous life. Now, again, how can you pique an interest? Okay, in what way? What would be a specific way maybe to do that? Okay, you could talk to them about the resurrection. Yeah. I don't have a lesson per se about the resurrection on Sunday, but I am going to be talking about Jesus, the humility of Jesus from Philippians 2 is what my plan is. But you can talk to people about the resurrection. What else? Yeah. You can talk about current events. Things that are around us, that we hear about every single day, and pique that interest. Okay. Right, and come and listen to it. Don't forget, do not forget this last one. Above all, live a righteous life. Just in surveying, it doesn't hit you until you actually go looking for it. But when you look on online forums where people talk about why they left church, and it's not just on online forums, but articles, probably if you tabulated them, I guess they would at least run in the hundreds of thousands, possibly even the millions. They will have, if you spend a few hours looking at that, you will see a common theme. The number one reason why people leave is, guess what? Hypocrisy. And it's such the clear winner. It's hard for me to tell you. Just people over and over and over again who say, I left my religion, I left my church because of hypocrisy. Just over and over and over again. Unbelievable. I have literally read it hundreds of times. So for us to live a righteous life, you can't imagine how important that becomes to try to get people to listen to the gospel. Okay, number 3, obviously invite them to assemblies, classes, men's classes, ladies' classes, all of the things that we do. And even just like Jenny had said, either if a lesson had been done, you get them to watch it, or what I would even prefer, which I would be happy to do if it can be pulled off, is to set up a time where whatever you've been talking about, maybe it's abortion. If I have enough lead time, then the lesson is done on abortion and you're able to invite your friend to come and listen to it. So in that respect, you're not really just letting it fall to blind chance. You've created the opportunity so that they can come and actually hear from it and hopefully learn from it. Okay, make sure that we're aware of visitors. Make sure that you're aware of visitors. It means everything for people to be greeted and talked to, for people to be written to. So many of you guys are great about writing them after they've come. That's a big deal. But greeting them, I would even say, is even a step beyond that. And you've probably run across a lot of people who've said that they had visited different churches, and by and large, they may just be kind of ignored. Okay, the last one here to think about. Learn to evaluate and talk through people's excuses. You know, in Luke chapter 14, the people gave excuses, and you can kind of think about what people are likely to say to you. They're not difficult to parse out most of the time. You know, if you pick 5 excuses, you're going to hear 5 excuses 90% of the time. And if you just think about something that's, you know, coherent and logical and not going to be argumentative or offensive, to deal with these 4 or 5 or 6 very common excuses, that's going to give you a leg up. Okay, so Jesus was able to then pique the interest. Third, he was able to show her evidence. So as we get down into verse 16, what does Jesus do? Go get your husband. And what'd she say? I don't have a husband. And Jesus actually, in verse 17, agrees with her, but then goes on to say, you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband, in that you spoke truly. So what was the woman's reaction? Sir, I perceive you are a prophet. She didn't know him, but he was able to. This is kind of one of these instances, and as we're just getting into the harmony of the Gospels, we've got these set number of miracles, and so they're set, they're defined, they're even titled. We've even given a title to every single one of them. But there's lots of miraculous action that's happening that isn't really tagged as miracles in the New Testament. This is one of those instances. Was this miraculous? Yes, but it's not a what? It's not a miracle that you're going to see in your list in a study Bible, but it is a miracle. It is miraculous. So what does that do with her? It makes her pay attention. That was the whole purpose of miracles, was to do what? To confirm the word. And so as Jesus is able to then tell her that when she says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet," she goes right into verse 20, and she thought, well, seems to know what he's doing, so I'm going to ask him the most controversial religious question of the day, which is, where do we worship? They got to talk about true worship, and then a little bit later on, what did they get to talk about in 25 and 26? You are the what? You are the Christ. You are the Son of God. Not that much longer after this, somewhere just in the neighborhood of under 3 years, Peter is going to stand up and preach at Pentecost. And Peter's going to be able to show those people evidence. So he essentially gave them 4 lines of evidence. He brought up, and I'm going to try to get this in order. He brought up all of the signs, wonders, and miracles that Jesus did. And remember, that was only a few weeks prior to that. So obviously there would have been people in the audience who what? Who still knew. Remember, probably were even in the audience on some of these miracles. So signs, miracles, and wonders of Jesus. He talked about fulfilled prophecy. He goes back to the Old Testament and then brings in these prophecies from Psalm 16, from Psalm 22, and shows how Jesus is the fulfillment of them. He talks about, so what else did he talk about? He also talked about what was going on that day. So what were the people able to see that day? The speaking in tongues. And then he also talked about, this was before the speaking in tongues, he talked about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Again, a miracle only a few weeks before that someone there in the audience would have at least, if they didn't witness it, then they at least would have had a friend who would have been there and who would have witnessed it. So, in order... There were the people who resurrected and walked around town. There was all of this. And the point was, God doesn't want you to what? He doesn't want you to just believe. He wants you to be established with what? With evidence. And I will guarantee you, there are some people who literally will never believe unless Jesus shakes their hand. That's just, unless He comes down on earth and He shakes their hand. They just won't. You're going to have a certain segment of people that you interact with that you know who will not ever believe. However, there will be some people that if you can show them the believability of the Bible, why the Bible's believable, why it's reliable, why we've got all of it. If you can show them how specifically the New Testament is crafted to let people believe and to show people believe, you know what they'll eventually do? They'll eventually believe in it. And then maybe you've got the opportunity to move them just beyond a belief, just beyond an acceptance of the Bible, that the Bible is what it claims to be. You could move them even further.
But during the first century, when Jesus was walking the earth and they were doing miracles, there were still those that didn't believe.
Oh yeah. Still those. And you have to remember that particularly with this one, with evidence, is this means study. This means that you're able to put this together. And you're able to give reasonable answers to people. And I will tell you that sometimes you'll meet people where the answers are relatively easy to do because they're, first of all, not adversarial. Secondly, their understanding of the Bible is pretty low. They just need teaching. They need to be able to see and evaluate if they can believe in the Bible. Sometimes you will have an aggressive atheist who has studied unbelief all of their lives. That is a tricky one. That is very, very difficult. So you need to be able to give people some answers. To be able to show some evidences, because that's what Jesus did. He did it miraculously, but we can do it non-miraculously. And we can, after we establish the fact that the Bible is a believable document, then move people down the path that the document has authority, meaning that it tells you how to what? It tells you how to live, tells you how to glorify God, tells you how to do what you what you should do. Okay, number 4, this last one, he produced results. So what happens in John chapter 4 and verse 27? Disciples come back, and what do they want to know? Why are you talking with her? The woman then left her water pot, went her way into the city, and what did she say? Come and see a man who told me all the things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ? Then they went out of the city, they came to him, and in the meantime his disciples urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat of which you do not know. Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? But Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do you not say, there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for the harvest. She was sitting right there. And he who reaps receives wages, gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. You get on down into verse 39, what happens? Now the Samaritans believed in him because of the woman. But in verse 40, it's also important. In verse 40, what did they do? They came out and they listened to him. They had come to him. They urged him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. So they got started with the woman, but what really convinced them? They finished up with Jesus. And that's and I find in that a really nice model. People hopefully can get started with us. We can show them evidence. We can maybe turn a heart back toward the Word of God. But once you turn it back toward the Word of God, they've got to be the one that can dig into it and actually learn it and hopefully decide that they want to live their lives in agreement with it. So, yes.
This is also another wonderful example of finding faith in the place where it was unexpected. The disciples, they weren't going to have dealings with these people. Here Jesus is talking to them. What are you doing? It's like these people are not going to have the faith. These people are not people we're supposed to be talking to. Yet there he is. He's going to forge on.
And then you add on top of that just how much good comes from this one personal encounter, the encounter that they were not willing to what? They weren't willing to do it, apparently, but he was. So, just some ideas to close with. You need to remember, and I want you to remember, that about 82% of the people who didn't attend anywhere are somewhat likely to attend. So if we were to make a scale and we started at the bottom and someone said, not likely, don't matter who invites me, don't matter how many times, whatever day it is, Easter, it doesn't matter, I'm never going. But the step above that is somewhat likely, all the way up to very likely to go. So in that large scale, 82% of the people will at least do what? Consider it. The way I read this, 82% of the people will at least give you a chance. I don't believe this second number is indicative of at least our brethren. I personally think our brethren are better than this. But Protestant-wide, only about 2% of church members invite people who don't attend anywhere during the year. So their outreach, if you want to call it that, is usually not very strong. Again, I think it's better for us, and it should be better for us. If we believe that we have truth and we have something for people to consider that's going to be a lot different than the religious world, then we need to tell them about it. But also as well, 80% of conversions come from people that we already know. Somehow, some way. And remember that while it's not still an actual conversion, just bringing someone who's fallen away back from the Lord is still something that's very, very monumental, and that does something to the glorification of God. But it's not an easy process. I will admit that the number of studies that people have before they're baptized, the largest number is what? The largest number is what? 0. They just what? They just decide to do it. And they decide to do it perhaps by what has been preached or what they've learned in a Bible class, and they've just let it kind of, I like the word marinate. They've just let it marinate in their heart, sometime for a long, long time. And then one day, they make the decision to come. Okay? That's the number one grouping of people, not a single Bible class. However, the second largest grouping of people, which is not that far behind, is how many? More than 5, which let me tell you is a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, it's a lot. This means that you need to have what when it comes to dealing with people? You need to have patience. You need to have patience. So where do converts come from? I want you to think about this. This will be the last thing that we consider. The age of those who obey the gospel. By a mile, the obedience to the gospel is the domain of the young. By a mile. So 37% are less than 20 years old, 46% are 20 to 40 years old, 8% are 40 to 65-year-olds. However, just like I think it was Regina had mentioned nursing homes, there's not many, but it does what? It does happen. Would you throw away 9% of people? Is 9% worth working for? Yeah, 9% is worth working for. Ask any corporation if they would like to have 9% more sales the next year. Would they say, no, I'm just not real into it? But I do want to give you just a little bit of hope as we come to the close. Think about this large, large number. This article was from last week. From last week. They are beginning to see more and more young people who believe in Jesus Christ. And if they come to a belief in Jesus Christ, then they want to know some substantive way that Jesus Christ can actually improve and change and make their future brighter. And that's where we can come in. And Jesus, with the woman at the well, gives the perfect paradigm that if you get through with all of the junk and all of the entertainment and all of the pickleball, He gives the perfect paradigm of how to meet people, talk to people, show them evidences, and hopefully get them at least with a heart that's willing to listen.